The general election has been announced. It's happening on the 4th of July 2024. And in this short video, I want to share with you the impact of this election and what's going to happen depending on what government comes in. Now, as a property investor developer, it's really important that you know what is coming up next so you can have your finger on the pulse on what's really going to happen. And in this video, I want to share with you my 3 key aspects on what is going to impact you and how you can actually move forward and overcome the challenges. So let's jump straight in to the first one. And the first one I want to share with you is inflation. Now, when we look at inflation, right now inflation has dropped, hasn't it? In fact, on the 22nd of May 2024, it's just happened recently, inflation has dropped to 2.3% according to the government. Now, I say according to the government because I'm going to explain to you what is really happening from an investor's point of view. Now, that 2.3%, you may think that actually that's a very low inflation and the government actually going towards their targets. However, that's impacted the markets badly because the markets were expecting a fall to 2.1%. So conversely, what's happened is it's made the economy even worse. So the inflation really isn't the basket of goods that the government are measuring by. The inflation really, when you look at inflation correctly, is a completely different basket of goods. So what is that? So firstly, inflation is being impacted by new cars. Now, if you've gone out there to buy a new car, you'll notice that there's a whole lead time, a waiting time to get any decent car. And they're out of stock and so on. That is all happening. Why is this happening? Because the prices of cars have gone up. If you've gone into part exchange something, you'll notice that the values of the cars have held their values, and in some cases, they've actually increased as well. So there's a lot of inflation happening when it comes to vehicles. Now, that's the key measure that you can use as a real basket of goods to measure inflation. The second inflationary measure is flights. Have you noticed when you're going on holiday, the flights, the prices have gone right up, haven't they? That inflationary pressure is there. That's the second part of the real basket of goods. And the third one is your basket of goods at your supermarket. Have you noticed how much the prices have risen over the last 36 months? Well, these 3 key aspects are the real measure of inflation. So my view is the inflation that our government is telling us at the figures they aren't actually the figures that real inflation is being measured by. Inflation, in my view, is much higher. Now, if a new government comes in and it happens to be the other side and the government comes in, well, there's going to be massive changes happening. Right now, my view is that inflation is being held back because, of course, we are having this election. After the election, it's like an elastic band. What's going to happen is inflation is going to go straight back up to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I also see it actually touching double digits. Now, how can we say this? Well, look at what the wealthy people are doing right now. Wealthy people are now investing in gold. They're investing in assets that make sense. Now, gold hit a high on April the 12th, and wealthy people are investing money into gold and they're investing money into property. For the economy and the regular people, that's not great. However, as property investors, you choose to jump into property investing. What we realize is that inflation can actually be a friend. Let me explain. So, if you have money sitting in the bank, you have £100,000 sitting in the bank, that £100,000 is going to have that inflationary pressure. If you've got £100,000 where you're borrowing that money to put into income-producing assets like us, and you trust the asset, well then that same money is going to be eroded by inflation. Now, long-term inflation is 5%. Now, when you compound that over, let's say, a medium-term plan, like 10 years, you find that to be compounded to 63%. So what that means, of course, is that your money in the bank, that £100,000, is being eroded by £63,000, and your loan that's going into buying an asset that is income-producing is also going to be eroded by that inflation by 63%. Now, when you think about this, so are we then saying, buy income-producing assets like property, use inflation to your advantage, and reduce the loan? So whether a new government comes in, that's a different government, it's kind of irrelevant when it comes to inflation because inflation is going to help you to actually make more income. Strange but true. Right, let's jump into the next one. Now, the next key factor I want to share with you that's going to affect a new government coming in, because the election is happening on the 4th of July, is one of the key elements that we all need to make sure that you've got a viable property business. And I'm going to put it on the board here right now. Tenants. We need tenants, right? Now, the second key impact of the elections with a new government is also going to impact your tenants. And of course, your tenants are your paying customers, aren't they? So you need the tenants to run your property business. And unfortunately, these tenants are going to really be impacted by the cost of living crisis. And it is going to get worse, unfortunately. So what do you do as a property investor? So one of the things that we're doing is we're putting into place safeguards to you so that you can make sure that your tenants are paying the rent on time. Now, some of these tenants, unfortunately, are going to be struggling. So you're going to be having to be in the situation where you're being able to put in systems in place to make sure that the rent is being paid on time. So let me share with you specifically what I mean by this. So first of all, make sure that you're measuring your income coming in. Make sure that you know when the tenants are supposed to pay your rent and that the rent has been paid in. If it's being paid into a letting agency, well then the letting agent should make you aware. You should be proactive with them and make sure that the rent is being paid in, at least to the letting agent before it comes to you. Now, if people are struggling, well then it's about creating a short list, a hot list over each month to make sure that you can check in with those tenants to make sure that they are being able to pay the rent. And unfortunately, some people are going to struggle. And if they are struggling, it's about then building payment plans, because you're not going to evict the tenant just like that for no reason. You're going to make sure there's a payment plan so the income comes in. So it's about working with the people to help them to be able to budget and create a payment plan for that rent to come in. Now, another thing that you can do is also put some good insurances into place. Now, there's a number of insurances out there. Now, I'm not affiliated with any of these, but I want to mention to you one of them. So one of them is called Let Alliance. Now, Let Alliance will work for an intermediary, like a letting agent. And what happens there is there's a mediation process when the tenant struggles to pay rent. And these are things that you're going to have to put into place over what's coming up over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, because there's going to be a number of U-turns that the government are going to make after they've messed it all up. Now, as a last resort, if the tenant can't pay the rent and there is an eviction process, well then Let Alliance will also make sure that that process is nice and smooth for you. You have minimal involvement, and also they'll actually help to pay for the costs of eviction as well. Now, it's things like this that you want to start putting in belts and braces right now, because with a new government that is not focused on the private rental sector, let's be honest, is more focused on social housing. These are things that you're going to have to be putting into place. Now, if you'd like us to help you to keep updated with the content or what's coming up next, then feel free to subscribe to our channel, and you can click on that bell icon to get the latest videos. I'm doing more videos like this to share with you on what's coming up next, so you can navigate this minefield and actually make property investing a success. So you can click on that subscribe button and join our community, and I will continue to share with you to the best of my ability in terms of what's coming up. The third key point I want to share with you is legislation. Legislation after the general election is going to be one of the key impacts to all of us. You, me, people investing in property, new and people that are scaling. So things to be aware of that might be coming up with a new government, and you know who I'm talking about. So one of the things is rent caps. So rent caps, unfortunately, are now on the horizon with a new government. So rent caps. Now, when it comes to rent caps, I always like to look at the Scottish system, because Scotland tends to do various things before we do these things in England and Wales. Now, if you look at what's happening in the Scottish system, when the rent caps actually came in, the rent caps only really came in for new tenancies, and that's how that worked. Now, what happened there was that the private rented sector actually shrunk. Many landlords left the market because they weren't professionalizing. And the landlords that are professionalizing, new and experienced, what that means is you've got even a larger, bigger pool of tenants, and what you've also got is a smaller amount of stock. So in a strange way, yet a very beneficial way to you, what actually happened is it drove demand even higher. It drove rent prices even higher, to the extent that the government had to give away on that, and they did a U-turn. Now, are you familiar with governments doing U-turns? Yeah. Well, that's what's coming up next. So I wouldn't be too concerned about rent caps. And even if the rent caps did come in, remember that the rent caps typically work on the inflationary measures, and typically it will look at an increase of around 3% each year anyway. So you're still able to increase the rents as time goes on. Not something that you need to be concerned about in your correct investment areas. So what do you do as property investors to prepare for any rent caps that may come in? Well, first of all, have a look at your tenancies right now. If you haven't increased the rent, now's the time to check in and make sure that you're getting rent at market value. Any rent caps that come in will work from current rentals from current tenancy agreements. Secondly, make sure you're investing in properties in the correct areas. Moving forward, anything that you're buying, make sure there's a higher yield, there's more rental, so that you can stress test and make sure that there is a buffer of income that's coming in after all your costs. So you've got the right postcodes, the right areas that you're investing in. Now there's going to be a number of new mandatory requirements that are coming in. So the EPCs are already going, and we've got a new version of the EPC coming in next year, and any new government is going to enforce that even further. Heating systems, there'll be changes to heating systems. They'll be changing to cladding systems. There's going to be more scrutiny on the properties themselves to make sure that they're to a good standard. Now, in one way, it means it's going to cost more money. In another way, what you're doing is you're future-proofing your success, because those properties will be there for more of a long standing, your maintenance will be reduced. So yes, there's negatives to this, but also there's going to be positives to this. And all you really got to do is adapt to the market as we go along. A final key aspect of changes in legislation is that your paperwork, your agreements are also going to change. Now, you're already aware of the Renters Reform Bill. And in that Renters Reform Bill, there are many changes to your tenancy agreements. That's already happening. And with a new government who is not really focused on the private renter sector, who don't really like landlords, I don't know why, that's my view, what you're going to find is those agreements are going to become even more tenant orientated. One of the things is they're going to be much more tenant focused. So we might find things like agreements where they are 2-yearly agreements. So your tenant has the longevity of an agreement being a minimum of 2 years. Now, let's just assess this. If you have a property which you are renting out to your tenant, and your tenant is your paying customer, doesn't that give you more surety that you've actually got a customer for a longer term? To be fair, if you're like me, you're okay with that one, aren't you? Because as long as the rent is coming in, you've got someone there with a longer agreement, gives you that security. Many of these things that are coming in are advantageous to you. Just be aware of this. So today we've discussed inflation, we discussed tenants, we discussed legislation, and whatever comes along, whichever government comes after the 4th of July 2024, the private rented sector is needed. So what's the summary message that I'm sending you right now? Well, it's keep calm and carry on. Because when we look at property investing, it's the best asset class that you could be investing in. It's always been, and it will always be. Now, I'm actually running this 4-part online workshop all about how you can make money from property right now in the current climate. I'm doing this because there are so many people out there that are concerned and worried and don't know what to do next. And as active investors, I want to share with you from our grounding on how you can really make this work. So over 4 evenings, I will be sharing with you 12 specific strategies that are working really well in the property market right now and will work after the elections, no matter what government comes in. I'm also going to be sharing with you specific case studies, numbers, facts and figures, so that you can really upskill and really use the next 12 months where people out there are concerned to really optimize at this point to actually move forward in property and grab the opportunities that other people out there are worried and concerned about. Now, to register your free space, you will see a link on the screen right now. All you need to do is click on the link, register your free space, enter your details, and I'll see you on this 4-part Making Money from Property workshop, and let's work on this together and let's get you moving forward in property investing.